Perfect. Okay. We're going to get started again. All right. Okay, we're back in business. Again, welcome everybody to Women of the World's Volunteer Orientation. Today, we're going to cover a variety of topics. We're going to do an introduction to what Women of the World is, briefly go over their history. We'll also talk a little bit about the refugee landscape so that you understand where Women of the World fits into the bigger picture of refugees and forcibly displaced people here in Salt Lake City. We'll talk about Women of the World's mission and, as an extension of that, the ways that you can get involved as a volunteer. And then we like to close off with a discussion about some helpful tips that we have about setting boundaries with clients, and then also those boundaries that we make sure that clients understand as well, so that when you begin volunteering, everybody's on the same page. So the first thing is talking about who Women of the World is and why it's so important that we're doing what we're doing. Women of the World seeks to be able to empower women, forcibly displaced women to be specific, from all nations to achieve independence, economic success, and a voice in their community. Each of these aspects of the mission will be broken down into the services that we provide, and I'll talk about them later. But it's impossible to talk about our mission and the organization itself without recognizing our executive director and founder, Samira Harnish. Samira has an amazing story and amazing experience being able to help women in these communities to be able to feel that sense of empowerment and independence. And a large part of that comes from her empathy that she has. She was an international student that came here to the US. She didn't have a strong sense of community here. She came over without her family. And so she was here, she had to learn English. She started to learn English to be able to enroll in college. And that determination and grit is embedded into the organization, where we are saying, okay, if a person like Samira didn't have that sense of community, can we provide that community for these women? Once we provide that community, how do we go about encouraging them? How do we say, well, maybe not every woman wants to go to college or pursue a college degree. So what does success at the end of the day look like for them? And then how do we align them for that success to make sure that they are achieving all of the support, all of the community, and accessing all of the resources that that community has for them to be able to accomplish their goals. So to understand a little bit of WOW terminology, when we talk about forcibly displaced people, specifically forcibly displaced women for our organization, we're talking about individuals who are refugees, asylees, immigrants, undocumented or DACA recipients, and sometimes even international student women. When we're talking about these individuals, what we talk about most often will be their status. And that status is actually very important because it determines the benefits that an individual receives. And because of the benefits that they receive, it drastically affects the way that they're able to interact with much of their community. The one people know most about would be an individual that's undocumented, right? That's kind of the one that's in the news all the time. But there are several different statuses that will determine how a person is receiving those benefits. And the two I want to make sure we highlight today is the difference between a refugee and an asylum seeker, just because they're most often confused with each other. The first one is a refugee. So a refugee is a person who has fled their home country due to violence or persecution or the threat of violence or persecution. And they have gone to a second country. And in that second country, they have applied through an international organization for a refugee status, and that's usually in a refugee camp. That wait and application time can be anywhere from 1 year, if it's going at its most smooth, to about 20 years is the longest that I've heard from a client that's been here. Many of these individuals were born in refugee camps that come over to the US. The part of the reason it takes so long for that refugee process is because when a refugee comes to the United States, they have a whole process that's already laid out for them. So as soon as they come to the US, they're working with a group called a resettlement agency, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And they receive several benefits. They receive access to housing immediately. They receive case management services, and they receive Medicaid. So they have medical expenses covered. So theoretically, they're well established as soon as they come in to the United States. And they have those resources, those base resources covered. An asylum seeker is an individual who has left their home country through violence, war, or threat of oppression, and they have gone to a second country, and in that second country, they've applied for asylum. So if we're talking about us here in the US, they've fled their home country, they've come to the United States, and in the United States, they apply for asylum. Because they've applied in the United States, that means that they're doing essentially the wait period for the refugee to be able to receive those benefits here in the US. So they do not immediately have access to the benefits that a refugee would have. So they do not immediately have housing benefits, medical benefits, um, other social benefits like food stamps, they do not have access to. And that process can take somewhere between, again, 1 to 4 years, we've heard, for that status to be granted. And so in the meantime, asylum seekers are usually left a little bit stranded. The process has become a lot more smooth for them in the past 4 years. However, it's still quite difficult. And many people don't even have a work permit when they apply for to be an asylum seeker. And so they're here in the US, they aren't able to work to be able to find gainful employment. They don't have access to social benefits. And so that's where organizations really need to step in to be able to provide that support in the meantime. When an individual does come through to the US as a refugee, they're welcomed by a resettlement agency. And that resettlement agency can take many different forms, but here in Utah, we have two. The first one is the IRC, the International Rescue Committee, and the second one is Catholic Community Services, or CCS. These two organizations will provide a base set of case management. That's anywhere from about 6 months to about 18 months. And slowly they're being phased out as they're headed towards independence. As we know, it takes a lot longer than 6 months or even sometimes 18 months to be considered independent and to have acclimated to the United States and to the US culture and language. And so that's where organizations like Women of the World come into play. We are considered a post-resettlement agency. So we are an organization that steps in after they finished with IRC or CCS. Going back to our mission, where I said our goal is to help empower women to achieve independence through economic success and a voice in their community. If you see here, that's essentially two of our main pillars, right? We have economic empowerment, where we're helping women to find gainful employment. We work directly with employers across the valley. And the strength that comes with that is that we can say, hey, we just submitted an application for a woman who doesn't have the best English. And sometimes for women who don't have the best English, if a random number calls them, they're not going to pick up. And so you, hiring manager, can instead call us at Women of the World. We'll help to set up and arrange that interview for you. We'll practice the interview with the client. We'll make sure that she's getting and she's getting a good job, that she's prepared for it. And then afterward, we provide our services to say, okay, do we need to do any cultural trainings to prepare an employer to receive this client? Do we need to step in with the client to say, okay, there's going to be some large cultural differences that we need to work on. Maybe punctuality is a problem, so let's set some alarms in your phone. What time does the bus schedule work? How do we work through all these processes together? The second one is the community development, where we're trying to get people and our clients access to the community. It's really easy to overlook the fact that when a person comes to the United States, they are leaving behind all of their social capital as well as their physical capital. There's a really common phrase here in the US that it's not about what you do, it's about who you know, right? Imagine going to a place where you don't know anybody and you don't have access to those networks to get your kids a job when it's time for them to get a job, to get promotions, or to be able to work the system, that's all taken away from them. And so what we want to do is to get women access to our larger Salt Lake community, and that's largely where volunteers come in. We love pairing women up with mentors, to have volunteers come and interact with them in English classes, whether that's a conversation buddy, and I'll get into different ways to volunteer in a few minutes, but that's where we really would like volunteers to be active and engaged in that process. And again, an important part of this is that we're helping women to find a voice in their community. And a large part of that means building up confidence. One of the most difficult barriers that any of our amazing ladies will face here in the United States is English. And so we have 2 different English classes that we hold through Women of the World. The first one is a practical English class. It's essentially a conversation class. It's meant to be very informal, a comfortable environment where everybody can laugh at each other and make mistakes and be vulnerable, because anybody who has tried, whether they've succeeded or failed at learning a second language, knows that it requires a lot of vulnerability, that you have to be willing to make fun of yourself. You have to be able to relax and just enjoy the process. And that's what we try to do with our practical English class. The second one is an intensive English class, which, as the name would say, is designed to be a little bit more intensive. We hold typically it in sessions, kind of like semesters. They're usually 2 to 3 months long, and it's about 4 days a week and 3 hours a day. And so women that enroll in that typically have a goal in mind, saying that, okay, I'd really like to apply for my GED. And so I want to get a quick English refresher for a couple months and then apply for the test. Or I really want to enroll in community college and I want to kind of get ready to take the placement tests before I even take them. Some women even want to just get better jobs. A lot of people don't know, and I personally was surprised when I found this out, that for some of the most base level positions that we have here, such as like janitorial positions, many places will require a basic English test. And so some of those basic positions are even off the table if you aren't confident and capable in your English. And the third pillar that we have here, the third program that we do as far as our services go, is what we call customized service. It's essentially a catch-all term for our case management services, but the idea is that everything needs to be tailored to meet the woman where it's at. It's really hard to do any out-of-the-box services at Women of the World, just because each and every woman is at a very different place. And because our goal is independence, that means that each woman needs to be incorporated into that process in a very different way. So for example, if somebody comes in and is filling out an application with me, and there's 2 different women and they're both filling out the same application, one might be more confident in her English skills. And so I'd actually pass the application over to her and say, okay, you fill this application out. I'm going to be right here. If you have any questions, you can ask me and we'll work on it together. And then I'll go through and I'll proofread it and we'll submit it together. Another woman, she might not feel confident. So I'll say, okay, let's bring in all your documents, bring in your IDs. And then your responsibility is to write your name and your birthday on every page where that's applicable. And while I'm filling out the rest of the form, I'm going to have a worksheet for you, and you can work on writing your kids' names and your kids' birthdays, so that the next time you come in with that same form, you'll be writing your names, your kids' names, and then all your birthdays. And then the next time you come in after that, we're going to add in social security number. And the next thing after that, we're going to do one more step. And the idea is that we're constantly progressing towards independence, so that however long it takes, maybe it's a year, maybe it's 2 years, she'll be able to fill out that form on her own. And then she'll be able to then hopefully teach somebody else to fill it out. And the whole cycle continues. To break it down again, customized service means that we're working one-on-one. It's a core part of the mission that we believe everything needs to be tailored to be able to see success. Community development looks like many different ways for every woman, but again, it's about building a sense of community. One of the most important things I found here is that we need to break into different communities that we have. It's really easy to say, okay, our Arabic speaking population, they can all come together and we'll have volunteers to work with them. And then maybe our Congolese population is going to be over here. But one of my favorite things is that in our English classes, we'll see 2 women who are sitting next to each other. Both of them are coming from different primary language backgrounds, and both of them are trying to learn English together. And so they get to work together on learning English, and that's a huge bonding experience. And so the community can be developed not only with our volunteers and the native English speakers that we have here, but also amongst the women themselves. And then economic empowerment is always looking forward to the future. It's saying one of the key features of success for each of these women is for them to be financially stable and financially independent. And so what steps do we need to take as an organization to be able to look out for them, to help them to achieve that success and that independence? So for you as volunteers coming in, there are several different ways to get involved, and I'll go through each of these. The first one would be mentoring. That's probably one of the most common ways to volunteer that we have. Mentorship looks very different for each person. For some people, it's about developing a friendship and just kind of being that community guide to welcome a person here into the neighborhood. We always like to call our newcomers our new neighbors, right? So they're just people that moved in down the street and they might need a little bit of help and guidance getting around. For some people, that's going to be directly working on English. We have a wide variety of academic backgrounds here at Women of the World. We have some people that have master's degrees and they're working on their English. We have other people who have no experience with formal education at all and are illiterate in their primary language, much less in English. And so we're working on everybody to progress. But again, the idea of progress looks very different for everybody. I do have 4 women right now that are looking for mentors. So if this is something you're interested in, feel free to talk about it afterwards when we get to questions, or feel free to email me directly. Tutoring is another option. Community activities are essentially like coming and being their activity buddy when we have activities here. And then if there's like a specific skill that either a woman wants to work on, or if you feel confident in teaching, that could be things like budgeting, sewing. There are many different skills, learning how to use computers, like computer literacy, anything that would benefit them and provide them a useful skill, particularly if we're looking at independence. We do ask for a 6-month commitment, which we try to average out to about 1 hour per week, but for some people that's going to look like 4 hours one time a month. If you're doing like an activity together, other people that might be like every other week. It obviously can shake out very differently. We do have a matching interview where you would come and you'd meet with a case manager, and the case manager would just basically go over, make sure your schedule is okay, ask you some basic questions to make sure that you'd be a good fit for the client. And then we do in-home pairing for some people. With COVID, that's definitely changed how we go about this process. We don't assume that every mentorship is going to be done at a person's home, but if you do want to do any activities outside of office hours, we do ask that a client or a volunteer undergo a background check. The background check's fairly non-invasive, but the idea is that we're vetting all of the volunteers before we invite them to go to a client's home. The second way of being able to participate at Women of the World is our English classes. Like I said, we have 2 different English classes. And so this English teaching would be participating in our practical English class. I like to call them conversation buddies because you're just partnered up one-on-one. And then sometimes it's 1-on-4, depending on how many volunteers and how many students show up for the class. But it's just engaging in conversations. Usually there'll be a topic for the day, and then engaging with those words or the vocabulary that we've selected for that day. The idea is that there is no objective for the class. Like nobody is taking a test at the end of the day. Instead, everybody is just practicing for real life experiences. So we might have like prepositions that we're working on, like in, above, before, after. But if that's just not what that woman needs to work on that day, that's totally fine. You can move on and you can just talk about preparing for a doctor's appointment if that's what a woman would like to work on. Right now, we do have those practical English classes once a week. I'd love to expand that to more days if we have enough volunteers to be able to support it. For us and for the women, it usually makes the most sense that it would be during the day. So somewhere between 10 to 4. The reasoning behind that is because many of these women aren't employed or can't be employed because of their language levels. And then also many of them have kids. And so part of what Women of the World is designed to do is to help these women not feel so isolated in their home. And so we give an opportunity for people to be able to come together and to join in that common goal of learning English together. So if that's something you're interested in, again, feel free to talk about it with me once we finish the orientation, or to just email me directly. We love when people just want to volunteer here at the office. We have a variety of things to do. Like I said, I'm the office manager, so I almost always have a list of things I have not been able to get to just because We're really busy here, and so I'd love help being able to do it. There's lots of different ways that could look. You don't necessarily have to be here filing things, but I'd love to do that if that's your passion. You can help us write blog posts and make sure that these women have their stories recorded if they feel comfortable with that. Um, if there's just an aspect of the refugee or resettlement process that you'd like to focus on, feel free to pitch that idea to us, and we're happy to be able to help you give a platform for your words to be able to be seen. If you want to just come to the office to help us to make the women feel welcomed, to help get coffee or tea and just chat with people while they're waiting for appointments, that's another great way of being able to help women to practice their English and get familiar with the idea that every moment can be a language learning opportunity for them. And then lastly, if you have any skills that you would like to share that you think would be valuable for our clients, then please let me know. I'm happy to help give you a format to be able to teach these amazing women some of the skills that you are really proud of being able to achieve yourself. The one thing I would say whenever it comes to a workshop or skill sharing, you and I will sit down and essentially write up a proposal. And while we do that, we'll go through any of the key terms that we might be using, just so that you and I can walk through the exercise of delivering this type of content to a new language learner. The idea is that sometimes it's difficult for people whose primary language is English to recognize just how much we need to go back to the basics when we're talking to an audience like ours. And then we do have one-off opportunities at different events that we hold. These are a little bit more rare just because we aren't holding as many events because of COVID. We are planning to do 2 events upcoming. The first one would be our annual celebration, and I like to call that our celebration of success and achievement, because we just honor different women that have achieved their goals or who have made progress towards those goals. This year, that will be held on December 4th. And if you are looking to attend, feel free to go to our website in our events page, and you can RSVP there. We also will have our annual fashion show and gala, which we are hoping will be in person, and that will be held the week of March 8th, which is International Women's Day. And we're looking at March 10th right now, but we'll give you more details as we get closer to that. There are a variety of ways to participate at each of these events, so if you are looking to participate or volunteer, please let me know. And here are some pictures of the events. The one down at the bottom, that's the celebration of success and achievement, where we give out awards and certificates for women accomplishing their goals. In the top left-hand corner, you have Mother's Day. We hold that on Mother's Day every year, and we just honor the women, and we usually will have like a Mother of the Year award for somebody who's really gone above and beyond. And then in the top right-hand corner, that's our fashion show from 2020. We have an amazingly diverse group of people and women here in Utah, and sometimes I think it's really easy for us to think that we're not as diverse as we are, just because a lot of these groups tend to stay to themselves and be a little bit isolated. And so if we can magnify their voices, it goes a long way to showing just how accomplished this group can be. Okay, focusing specifically on volunteers again, there are a couple points I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of. Again, all of these points are also communicated to our clients when we're setting up any kind of volunteering opportunity. The first one is that as a volunteer, you are not a means of financial aid, and you are not a means of transportation. We in no way want to limit anybody's charity. However, there are certain repercussions that come with being very generous. As we'll talk about later, we are a very small office, and this is a very tight-knit community, and so word tends to travel fast. One of the examples I love to give is that we made a mentorship matching that went off really well. They just became really great friends. They were basically family. And the volunteer really wanted to do a Christmas activity for their mentee. And that's absolutely fine. But this particular woman really went above and beyond, and she like got her whole community together, and bought a huge amount of presents for this family, and it's absolutely wonderful. However, we then started getting calls from other members saying, well, why didn't I get these things? Or why wasn't I paired up with a volunteer who'd be able to provide all of those things for me too? Um, Again, we do not want to say you aren't allowed to be generous with the people you're volunteering with. Instead, we just rather say, like, can those funds that you had raised be put in a different way? If you want, you can donate gift cards that we can give out to all different women, for them to be able to buy gifts for their kids. There's many different ways to get around that. And then as far as transportation goes, there is obviously going to be cases where it's an emergency, and definitely please give clients rides. I am the first person to do that, right? Like, I have definitely given clients rides. However, at the end of the day, our organization is all about self-sufficiency. So if it comes down to the fact that a woman needs rides to work, well, we do have a public transit system here, and we have access to funds to be able to provide support if she can't afford to use the public transit system. And then if she needs help learning to ride the bus, then as case managers, we can go about doing that. Or we can work with their volunteer to be able to do that. There is being a volunteer at Women of the World should not be a financial burden upon any volunteer. To get a little bit more in detail, we ask that both clients and volunteers do not discuss religion in any capacity with the clients and with the volunteers. That's for both parties. We definitely understand that religion is a large aspect of both parties' lives and personalities and habits, and activities. However, we just create that standard across the board. And what I tell volunteers is just a good principle to live by is to be asking more questions than you're seeking to provide answers to. Again, religion is an extremely important aspect. And as a volunteer, you are coming to the relationship in a position of power, just because you're the individual who knows how to navigate the social and community climate that we have here in Salt Lake City. Many women have expressed that it's difficult to say no when invitations are extended to be able to learn more about different religions. And so they aren't able to accurately communicate their discomfort in those things. And so that's why, just again, across the board, we just ask that volunteers do not discuss that with clients. And again, clients are told the same thing about not discussing it with their volunteers. If that ever becomes an issue, please let me know. I'm happy to talk to any of our clients. The next point is respecting the fact that these women have overcome incredible odds and incredible challenges. And sometimes there are consequences that come with that. And many of these women are the ones who are facing the negative consequences of it. In here, it says, while these events, their past, do not define their future, they do influence how many women interact with communities, strangers, crisis events, and interpersonal relationships. A really common thing, a really common side effect of experiencing traumatic events is short-term memory loss and a difficulty maintaining and retaining information. If you're thinking about learning a new language, that's probably one of the primary skills you need to have. And that's why many of these women really do struggle with learning English. And so respecting the fact that some of these women are not coming to the language learning process or the assimilation process at their full capacity, and understanding that that might affect the outcome and the journey that these women will need to take. As volunteers and as staff members even, we're here to encourage them and to remind them of how strong and how incredible they are, and to reinforce the fact that they can overcome any of the challenges that they're faced with. As an organization, we feel that we need to be the ones providing that step to welcome these women into our communities, and that it requires a community like Women of the World and the volunteers that you are looking to join into to be able to do that. And so that's why we're very excited that you're here and that you're looking to volunteer with us. I guess here is my contact information and the contact information for our three amazing case managers that we have. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording, and then I'll just pull the slide back up so that you will all be able to see that and write that down if you need.